And it's a big one this weekend at Camp Randall Stadium in Madison. The University of Alabama is coming to Madison for the first time since 1928. They are the number 4 team in the country. Wisconsin will probably need a little bit more than they showed in their first 2 games of the season. They are 2-0, but the 27-13 win over South Dakota on last Saturday leaves a little to be desired. I think it was probably a little bit better than that score indicates, but still, they do not look necessarily like a team that can beat the number 4 team in the country. And Mark, that's where I'm going to begin. Can they beat the number 4 team in the country? I know that's pretty easy and there's a lot that goes into that. Do they have a chance against Alabama?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course they've got a chance. In fact, I just filed a story for JS Online about 5 ways Wisconsin can pull an upset. And I mean, obviously they're going to have to play better. I do agree. Last week, after leaving the South Dakota game, going down to talk to the coaches and things, you kind of got a feeling like, well, maybe they didn't it wasn't as great, a great performance. And granted, they could have played better, but then in retrospect, when you look at the game, really there were a couple possessions that I think that really kind of turned that game from being maybe a blowout to a game that was really close. So, this week you look at Alabama and, a couple of points I make, I will let the cat out the bag for the story, but please read it. Obviously, anytime you got a big-time opponent coming in, your quarterback's got to play well. They need Tyler Van Dyke to probably have his best game of this young season. They got to get turnovers, which is something they really haven't done well. They got a late game turnover against Western Michigan when the game was out, was over. They got to win the turnover battle. That's another key. And I also think they got to play physical. And with Wisconsin, their best bet of playing physical and setting that tone is with the offensive line. So how much can UW offensively rely on that offensive line to set the tone? Because we already know that we've kind of talked about the challenges the defensive line has, with Thompson out, pretty much for the season. So the question becomes, okay, can Wisconsin match that in some fashion? And from a physical standpoint, it's got to come from that offensive line. So I mean, those were 3 of them. Also, fast start. We talked about Camp Randall Stadium. It's rare that an SEC team comes up here. I looked up, I think it was like 1971. I mean, that's the last time an SEC team has played in Camp Randall Stadium, and that was LSU back in the day. So it's a great opportunity for Wisconsin to measure itself going into Big Ten play. It's a great opportunity for them to show the country, hey, maybe we're a little better than people think. But I think, having the game at home, it's imperative that they start fast. Give the fans something to, be excited about, get the energy up in the stadium. And even though Alabama's probably used to that kind of stuff, everyone gets up for Alabama. It's definitely would help, UW's cause.
Yeah, I said what I said earlier about the South Dakota game. The Badgers were driving. They were on the doorstep of another score as time expired. And it takes a muffed punt to get them 3 points. If the score's 30-10, maybe people feel a little bit better about it. But maybe not. Maybe not much better, 20 points against an FCS school. Because one thing they did was run the ball so well against Wisconsin. And I want to return to that. You mentioned, you brought that up. We talked about James Thompson Jr., like you said. Maybe should have talked about him more. It feels like teams can just walk over this team. Elijah Hills, I guess, has kind of been one of the breakouts, I would say, to start the season as a guy who has been disruptive. But I don't know if they have the disruption up front to really be able to handle, if not South Dakota, then certainly not, and forget Alabama, just teams in the Big Ten. Like, I feel like teams in the Big Ten, as it stands today, will be able to run all over Wisconsin. Do you see that as well? Are there switches, personnel switches, scheme switches? I mean, I don't know what the solution is because they are so limited up front on bodies.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because, you talk about, that presence up front. And, one group that's kind of been quiet so far for Wisconsin has been, that outside linebacker group.
For sure.
Leon Lowry, John Pius, Daryl Peterson coming back, Aaron Witt, finally healthy. And, can those guys start being disruptive? And, I asked Fickle about that, this week, and he kind of talked a little bit about, these first couple games, been sort of unique type of opponents where maybe those types of players, it's hard for them to kind of get going. Alabama, presumably might be a little more of a more traditional team that, we might get a better idea of, the impact those guys can have. But when you talk about the defensive front, it's just not those interior linemen, because they put those outside linebackers up there on the line too, and we really haven't seen a lot of plays, from those guys. So, that's another thing. We got to see, if you're rooting for UW, how are those guys doing this week? But as far as the defensive line, you got what you got. That's the tough part. There are no waiver wire pickups. You just got to hope guys develop over the course of the season. Elijah Hills is a guy that really is kind of making the most of this opportunity. Now he gets to see what he can do against Alabama. I mean, this is a guy who played at FCS Albany last year. Now he's going with the big dogs. It doesn't get any bigger than, at least from a program standpoint these days, than Alabama. So it's going to be interesting to see how those guys do and how they do against a team that is sort of similar in terms of, a Big Ten team versus an SEC team versus, Wisconsin going against South Dakota or a MAC team. I wonder, like, with some of these close games, like, because we saw this a lot. We saw Bowling Green scare Penn State last week. Obviously, Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. I think Oklahoma got scared by Houston. And I wonder, like, for these, favored larger school teams, like, how much they're holding back. Like, do these teams kind of go into these early season games and say, hey, we think, they wouldn't say this publicly, but, we're physically better. We're going to stick to a pretty basic game plan and win the game that way. But when I'm looking at Western Michigan doing a fake field goal on the first week, it seems like some of these, these underdogs, that's kind of the nature of the beast. They're pulling out some of the stops or pulling out all the stops. So, in that way, I wonder, like, maybe these first couple weeks can be a little deceiving in terms of how deep teams are going into their playbook. But this week, you got two teams that are looking to, go into conference play next week or the week after. And, they want to go in on a high note or at least playing well. So it's just going to be a great measuring stick for people to really see where Wisconsin is.
I think as you talk about outside linebackers, it's just playmakers, lack of playmakers. I think that was a storyline last week on both sides of the ball. Sorry, not even last week, the week before with Western Michigan. Where are those playmakers? Where are they going to be? Where they're going to be coming from? And I look at the passing game on the other side of the football and think something similar. Now, C.J. Williams got a touchdown. They had a cool play, and then at a 50-yard touchdown. It was their first quarter was outstanding against South Dakota, and then they kind of fell back into long drives. Not a lot of, a couple bad breaks, a couple just, missteps that just got bogged down real fast where there was nobody to just break them out of it. How do you feel about the passing game? You can certainly include Tyler Van Dyke in that equation, but do they have the guys who can really go up and down the field with a team like Alabama or, again, any team in the Big Ten?
Yeah, early on you look at last year's numbers versus this year's numbers, and, the receivers, the average yards per catch is still, toward the bottom of the Big Ten, and it's really not much different than last year. I think last year Wisconsin receivers averaged 10.2 yards per catch. This year it's like at 10.7. And, early on, I know every team's schedule is different, but statistically, Van Dyke's toward the bottom in terms of, pass efficiency and, pass completion percentage. And, this is a time of year where, guys kind of fatten up on stats, so some of these guys are going to come down, but also you got to be a little concerned, well, like, why aren't Wisconsin's numbers a little better in the passing game? they're evolving. It's like you can't expect a team that won 7 games last year, had a problem starting games, had a problem scoring, and then all of a sudden it flipped, especially with not much of a personnel change. Now I will say, you talk about the receivers, we haven't seen. I think we got more to see of Tretch Kekahuna, and I talk about them holding back on the playbook some. I think there are some things we're going to see in terms of how they use him that maybe open up things, because the guy he's electric. Like when he gets the ball, I don't want to put too much on him, but he's a fun guy to watch, and we haven't really seen them do a lot with him yet. And I think he's a guy that maybe they could be creative with in the offense. And so, down the road as we get into the Big Ten season and even this weekend, how does he do? Do they make him more of a part of the passing game and maybe create some wrinkles that, are unique for him?
Before I let you go, 2 names I wanted to talk about. Tackett Curtis got some playing time after Jake Chaney was ejected for targeting in the third quarter against South Dakota, and Tackett Curtis did great. He's a newcomer and looked really good. And then Katie Akameli, I gotta say, a little mea culpa when we've talked about running backs. I've often skipped over him. It's Ches Malusi, it's Tyree Walker, and then we go to the freshmen. And I know Jackson Aker is here too, and I don't want to forget him either. But Yakameli has been really kind of exciting, and he got a lot of playing time with Walker out. He was questionable coming into the South Dakota game. I think they just felt it wasn't worth the risk. I think they were probably right to do that. But Katie Akameli, who's got great speed, we've always known that he's capable of flashing that speed, and he's looked fantastic. Those 2 guys, what are you seeing from them, and do you expect to see the same amount from them going forward?
Well, I mean, as far as Yakameli goes, it depends on, Tyree Walker's health. I mean, if Walker's healthy, it's going to be him and Ches splitting carries, and then Yakameli being that third back. Sometimes they'll put 2 backs in there together, or somehow need a breather. But yeah, you are right. Yakameli's been a guy that just kind of keeps hanging around. Like he's like you say, everyone's excited about these freshmen. Dylan Jones and Darian Dupree, and like, when are they going to be playing? And you got, Jackson Aker, he was kind of the third guy last year. And, he just keeps going, and he's got a good skill set. He can catch the ball. He's got some pretty good speed. You look at some of his runs, he showed some moves. It wasn't just straight line stuff, So, I mean, I think he's a guy definitely that, they might, he's one of those guys that probably just kind of keeps playing his way into opportunities. You're like, you think, hey, they got Ches and they got Tyree. What are they going to do, and how are they going to fit this guy in? And I think the fact he can catch the ball too is another thing that, will get him on the field. Maybe in a different spot than just the traditional running back. Tackett Curtis, I felt good after the game, because I wrote during the game. I'm not a football coach, obviously, but I wrote during the game. I was like, man, Tackett Curtis is making a lot of plays, and then after the game, Fickle talked about, hey, Tackett was one of the 3 guys he brought up after the game to kind of recognize how he played. I think he's definitely, even when Jake Chaney comes back, he's always been in that linebacker rotation, and I think he's going to continue to do that. I thought it was very telling that after Jake left, because players can have in-helmet communication this year, which is a pretty big responsibility. And after Jake Chaney left the game, Tackett Curtis is the one who's got the in-helmet communication. So, that kind of just shows you kind of what they think of him in terms of the player, but like from a mental standpoint of him being able to handle that, that added layer of communication. But yeah, he's an exciting player to watch. In retrospect, when he committed in January, there was so much excitement, and a lot of times the recruiting buzz in January doesn't meet the production in August and September. But so far, I mean, he's been pretty good. And watch him in practice. The other thing I kind of like, just as a linebacker, he kind of plays with a little edge. There were a couple times during camp where, he's probably a little more physical with guys than was appreciated. And it kind of led to just a little shoving and thing. In fact, there was one time with Yakameli. Yakameli took some exception with, how Curtis, grabbed him or tackled him, and for a second they kind of were pushing and shoving. But I kind of like the edge. It seems like he has.
Find everything Mark Stewart has at jsonline.com. He'll be there. I'll be there too. We'll watch Alabama in Camp Randall Stadium. The Badgers could pull an upset, and it would be one of the landmark wins in program history. If they're able to pull that off, we will see. We will talk to you again very soon. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.